Welcome to episode 2 of What Goes Bump in the Night. My name's Ryan, here with my co-host Clayton. It's just me and Clayton this week. We didn't have Joe on this episode. So Clayton, how you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Ryan. How are you?
I'm doing pretty solid. Anything happened to you over the weekend?
No, not much. I've just been really sitting here trying to research more into Llorona, but honestly, I'm just starting to get burnt out with it. There's so much information, but at the same time, it just all kept leading back to itself.
Yeah, this was a really hard subject to really get into, but we already did all the research, so let's go ahead and just jump right into it.
Sounds good.
So today's episode is actually going to cover 3 entities. It's going to be La Llorona, La Llorona, and the Woman in White. They all kind of circulate around the same backstory, and they all have a bunch of things that they have in common, like appearance and things of that sort. But it all starts with La Llorona. And Clayton did all the research on this, so I'm going to let Clayton go ahead and take over and talk about La Llorona.
So, La Llorona is a legend from Venezuela. It's represented by the vengeful spirit of a woman that only shows up to men that have love affairs out of their marriages. The name Llorona refers to the cloth that the ghost wears, which is a long white dress similar to a medieval undergarment. La Llorona could also be translated as sackcloth woman. My bad. The legends say that La Llorona was a young woman named Casilda. Now, there's at least 2 legends that kind of go off of her, origin, as there's actually multiple legends that go off of, La Llorona herself, but her origin stories, both of them are basically the same. So, Casilda lived in a small town in the plains of Venezuela, and was the most beautiful girl there. She was married to a great man who was caring and loving. Casilda and her husband had a baby boy one day, and Casilda was swimming naked in a nearby river when a man from her village had saw her and started following her around and watching her bathe in the river after that. She ended up seeing him after a while and told him to leave her alone, to which he ignored her and instead said that he was there to warn her that her husband was having an affair with her mother. Now, this is where the story kind of differs. So, some stories say that she ran to her house, and others say that she ran to her mother's house, but all of them basically go with the same thing, that she found her husband asleep with the baby in his arms, and blind with anger, she ended up burning the house down with them inside. So, I got a question about that for you, Ryan.
Go ahead.
Okay, so, in what way does it make sense to burn a house down with your husband inside? See, I could see it if she found them at her mother's house, but she found them at her house in some of them. So, what sense would it make to burn her husband and baby alive if she found them at her house?
So, in a situation like this, in my opinion, it doesn't make sense to burn the house down in any situation, just due to the simple fact that your baby's inside and the baby has done no wrong, it's innocent. But even if you did burn the house down, you would think she would try to save the child, because she went through that. And back then, labor was so much, more difficult, so you think that she would have, after going through the labor of having the baby, she'd be like, I need to save my baby, but my husband, who's a cheating, terrible man, can die. In my opinion, that makes the most sense.
Of course.
Yeah, but I don't know what you thought about it. What was your opinion on this?
So my opinion was basically the same thing. Well, first, I thought it was crazy that her first thing, when she found out that he was cheating, was straight just to kill him.
Yeah.
It wasn't to ask or anything, especially because the person who told her that he was cheating was just some random guy that she caught watching her, bathe.
Yeah.
So right there, it kind of tells you a lot, maybe I shouldn't trust this guy. Maybe this guy's probably just lying to me.
Also, it's just really weird because, like you said, it's just some man that's been watching her bathe and swim, and, the entire time, I'm assuming he's been hiding behind bushes and stuff like that and watching her, and she was like, I trust this pervert. Why would he have a reason to lie to me?
Exactly.
Yeah, but and then instead of asking her mother or asking her husband, she's like, all right, burn the house down, kill my mom with an axe. Or not an axe, a machete.
Yeah. So I'll go on to say that part of it. She ended up, all of them go back to the fact that she ran to her mother's house, and she found her on the patio. Well, she ran to her mother's house, or wherever her mother was, because some of them say she ran straight to her mother's house. Others say that she ran to her house first. But either way, Casilda found her mother and attacked her with a machete, splitting open her stomach. As her mother bled to death, she cursed Casilda, telling her from then on that she would have to avenge all women by killing their unfaithful husbands. From that day forward, Casilda became La Llorona. Now, that's the origin story of La Llorona or Casilda. Now, the tales of how she interacted as her ghost spirit, majority of them, I can't say they all, majority of them take place in the jungle. So I'm going to go with the more little known ones. Actually, no. I'll save that for near the end so I can explain to everybody how easy it is to transition that into the other tales, actually. So, some people say that La Llorona can shapeshift, and that she'd present herself as a dog, a wolf, or a woman with long black hair dressed in a cloak that's also black, and that she gives a cry that bristles the skin. Now, that's just kind of what they, would say about her. Like, I guess you could say her powers and stuff. I wouldn't even really consider it powers, but, well, the shape-shifting. Anyway, to go into the tales of it, she would appear to men working in the jungle. She manifests herself when her unsuspecting victims talk to their workmates about sex, or think of women they left behind in their hometown. Now, La Llorona would appear to such men, assuming the likeness of a beautiful woman or a loved one, and lure them into the forest so she could reveal her animal-like features and devour them or mangle them, and just leave their bodies to be discovered. Now, the second tale of it, which is told more in the Peacock Mountains, I guess, from all the studying I did, said that she would also appear to the men who in the jungle, but more of them that were lonely and willing to be unfaithful. It is claimed that the woman would then let these guys have sex with her instead of, like, I guess you could say teasing them or luring them away. But she would actually let them have sex with her, and then she would tear off and devour their genitals as punishment for their unfaithfulness. Now, there's another thing that I read, however, that said that instead of, like, tearing off and eating their genitals, she had a lot of, like, strange diseases, which you could call STDs. She'd pass them on to the guys after having sex with them, and basically the STDs would be along the lines that their penises would, like, get swollen with blisters and boils. So, there's a lot to take in there, if you think about it. Yeah. I want to go back to when I said that she, in one story, she would appear to people as a beautiful woman or a loved one, I said. So, the loved one, would you think that would be technically like a wife or something?
So, in the context of the story, I would think whenever they say loved one, it would be like maybe someone that they loved that wasn't their wife. Because that would make sense with the context of it. But it also is because it derives from the conquistadors and stuff like that. It derives from being a Spanish, a Latin American lore, because it comes from Venezuela. So it differs when you use the words significant other or loved one or, stuff like that. It differs because and the Spanish language differs so much from our language because certain words have double meanings. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's what my thought process is.
Weirdly enough, since you said the double meaning, I said how she meant her name could be translated as sackcloth woman, and I don't know my Spanish, so I could be completely wrong. But, there's something that also said that her name could actually also mean executioner.
That would make sense, because that's like a big problem. With English being the language that it is, it's really, really hard to translate a lot of words correctly. And sometimes, through different sources, different words have different meanings. But with her backstory, I could see it essentially meaning the same thing. as executioner because of the things that she does with, murdering men and stuff like that.
Yeah. So, to go on with this one's where it gets kind of crazy, because this is where I was saying about her shapeshifter. There's another story that's not actually about her being in the jungles. She would go and ask for rides, for like a car, like to get in the car and to go for rides, or for cigarettes. Now, there's a story that says, in the dim light, she seems like a shapely and beautiful woman. And that these guys would pick her up and take her to where she needs to go. And they wouldn't be able to tell what she actually looked like, because at a quick glance of her face, she just looked beautiful. But when you look closer, you can see that there's really no face, just a skull and a mouthful of rotting teeth. And it also said that she's a very deadly person, but she has an interesting relationship with tobacco. So, I already said how she'd asked for cigarettes, but there was other legends that said that keeping tobacco in your pocket was like an amulet against her, so she wouldn't attack you and kill you.
It's crazy how those two things like genuinely contradict each other, because with her being, asking for cigarettes, but it also saying this is a way to repel her. That's one of those things, since it is a story that's been exchanged via by mouth, like it's an oral story. It gets changed based on what people hear or what people think they heard in the story,
Yeah. Well, that's about it for La Llorona, and before we get into La Llorona, I want to point out how she is basically like the Woman in White, which is coming from a more European, legend or folklore. So basically, the Woman in White is essentially the same thing, except for it's literally just exactly the same thing, except for all that extra backstory. It's just, from what I think, is the fact that her husband or something was unfaithful and she took her own life. And she just, anytime she found anybody willing to be unfaithful to their significant other, she would ask for a ride and she would steal their soul.
Which is crazy how much these two stories genuinely differ from the La Llorona one. Because, La Llorona has a little bit of similarity. It's more, intertwined. But the Woman in White is nowhere close. It more closely resembles La Llorona because of the whole affair stuff. La Llorona has nothing to do with that, except for, I guess a section that you could talk, whenever I get to it, I'll talk about. But it's not, the exact same story, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and jump into it then real quick for La Llorona.
Yeah, because I'm completely out of any information. All the information that I found about the two is right there.
Oh, I can tell you now, I don't know how, but you have way more information than I do on La Llorona. La Llorona, it was hard to find information on, just like how it was with the Woman in White, because every time you would type in Google or you'd search it, it would bring up that movie from 2013, The Curse of La Llorona.
Yeah, no. Isn't that from the Conjuring universe, I think I read?
I think it is, but honestly, I got so angry looking it up that I just stopped looking at the movie. I wanted to find it and watch it so I could be like, oh, these are some similarities. But every time I Googled it, that would be the first thing that popped up. And for the first 7 things, it was just stuff about the cast, the soundtrack, the movie, places to watch the movie. And I just started getting annoyed, so I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to block this out of my memory and pretend like it doesn't exist. It just genuinely annoyed me.
Yeah, no, I felt the same way. Anytime trying to look any information up for La Llorona, it was very, very hard, because there's that, the movie, and then looking up the Woman in White, actually, a lot of stuff you found was for a movie or an old novel.
Yeah, there was also one for a TV show, and I didn't know what that was. And then I tried to look up the real-life counterpart, because there was a real-life counterpart that was a female murderer that was originally living in Florida, and she would get rides from men and would essentially lure them into cheating on their wives or just trying to have sexual relations with her. And she was originally a prostitute. Her name was Aileen Warnos. I didn't really get to look up a lot of information on her because when I typed in the woman in white, she didn't exactly pop up along with it, but I knew that from studying serial killer stuff, that she was considered the woman in white. But that was like another little side story that I thought I'd throw in there.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
So I'm going to go ahead and jump into La Llorona. La Llorona, also known as the Wailing Woman or the Crier, is a legend about a woman who drowned her children and mourns their death for eternity. She roams through Latin American areas as an apparition. Now, there are two different stories that are associated with La Llorona. The first one is a story about a woman named Maria, whose husband didn't love her, and he loved their sons very dearly. Maria caught her husband with another woman, and in her grief and anger she drowned their two sons, and then drowned herself. And afterwards she was refused entry to heaven because she had drowned her sons, and they sent her back to roam the lakeside to find their souls. And with her not being able to find their souls, she would lure other children in and drown them in the hopes to essentially trick her way into being accepted into heaven. And in both stories, Maria is portrayed as someone that came from a peasant family in a humble village, but she had just startling beauty, and it captured the attention of both rich and poor men. And in both stories, it says that she was incredibly loving of her husband. She wanted him to share the same affection for her. But where they differ is the situation in which she caught her husband having an affair. In the story I just told you, she walked into her home and saw it happening. Now, in another story, it is said that Maria was strolling with her two children on a shady path near a river, and her husband came by in a carriage, with an elegant lady sitting beside him. He stopped and spoke to his children, but ignored Maria, and then drove the carriage down the road without looking back. After seeing this, Maria went into a terrible rage, and turning against her children, she seized them and threw them into the river. As they disappeared downstream, she realized that what she had done, and ran down the river to save them, but it was too late. Maria broke down into an inconsolable grief, running down the streets and screaming and wailing. Now, in the first story, she drowns herself. In this story, she ends up going back to the river every day to mourn their deaths and mourn what she had done to them. And she stopped eating, and she started to get really unhealthy and really thin until she eventually died. Now, that's a big thing I would also like to throw out there with the La Llorona comparison, is they are both like these tall women, thin, with white dresses. But the bigger difference is with La Llorona, her face is covered with a veil, so you can never see her face. I don't know if that was the same thing with La Llorona. I remember you said that when they got up close, they just saw a skull with, like, decaying teeth, right?
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
But
good.
No, but, okay, but, like, basically, yeah, no, that's it. Like, I was wondering if maybe there might have been a veil or something, but, like you said, with all these, like, well, I don't think you said it in the podcast, but we've talked about this before, and there's a lot that gets lost in, like, the oral tradition of telling stories.
Yeah. That's just how it goes whenever whenever you tell a buddy and they tell a buddy and they tell a family member, it just kind of gets lost in description. But I don't know if you ever mentioned about real life sightings of her, if there was any like real life sightings of La Llorona, but I have 3 accounts of real life sightings of La Llorona in my little bit of notes here. So the first one I have is about a boy named Patrico Lugan, and he used to live on a ranch between Mora and Guadalupita, New Mexico, and his family were sitting outside, just sitting underneath a tree looking over at the lake, when they saw a thin, tall woman walking along the creek. She then seemed to float over the water and started up the hill and vanished. However, just moments later, she reappeared closer to them and then disappeared. The family looked all over for footprints but didn't find anything, and at that time they had no doubt that it was the woman in white, La Llorona. And there is another little section here with another story about Epifanio Garcia. He was an outspoken boy who argued with his mother and father. After a heated argument, along with his brothers, Carlos and Augustine, they decided to leave their ranch, Ojo de la Veca, to head down towards Villarreal de Santa Fe. However, along their way, they were visited by the tall woman wearing a black tapello and a black net over her face. Two of the boys that were riding in the front of the wagon when the spirit appeared, she sat between them and she stayed silent for their entire journey until Epifanio decided that he was going to turn back and head toward home, at which point she said, "I will visit you again someday when you argue with your mother." And the last one I have is in Santa Fe, New Mexico. A tall wailing spirit has been repeatedly seen in the Para building, which is the Public Employee Retirement Association building, which was built on land that was once an old Spanish Indian graveyard and is near the Santa Fe River. Many people who have been employed there have said that they've heard cries throughout the hallways and have felt unseen hands pushing them while they were on the stairs. That's all the stories I have involving like real life interactions with this entity, but I was wanting to jump into some like pop culture things because I know you talked about how they talk about La Llorona and Supernatural. I never got to watch the episode, but what happened in that episode?
So they didn't necessarily talk about La Llorona. They talked about the woman in white, which was essentially just a ghost. And for nobody who's really seen it, they didn't do too much with her other than the fact that this guy was on the phone with his girlfriend at the time and told her that he had to get off. Met the woman in white on the side of the road. She said she needed a ride, and he agreed to give her a ride. And then the whole time, I'm pretty sure he was touching all over her because that she gave him some kind of signal or something that it was fine, or maybe he didn't. Again, this has been like a year or two since I've watched this, but they get there, and she climbs on top of him, and essentially, since he's willing to cheat, she devours his soul. And just at the end of it, the main characters who are Sam and Dean are trying to get rid of her, and she climbs on top of one of them and attempts it, but their main argument is the fact that they haven't been unfaithful because they didn't do anything the whole time.
Yeah, I was about to say, because I remember you mentioning that when we were looking into it, because I was talking about wanting to bring up some pop culture references, and the only ones I knew were that movie that pops up every time you Google La Llorona and Supernatural that really genuinely mentioned La Llorona, and other than that, the woman in white stuff that you had found out too. But other than that, I think that's essentially all the information we have on La Llorona, La Sayona, and the woman in white. Is there anything else you have that we didn't discuss?
So, another pop culture reference is in Grand Theft Auto 5, I think, isn't it?
Yes, there's the woman in white who appears on the cliffside at 3 a.m., and the backstory with her is almost the exact same as La Llorona's.
So, that's really crazy.
I don't know if you ever had a chance to look into it, but with me, I ended up looking into it, and her husband was running for mayor or something. I think that's what it was. Her husband was running for the mayor, and her, being a good wife, was, helping him along with his campaign, and she walked in on him cheating with his secretary, and now she stands on the mountainside on, I think it's the right-hand side of Mount Chiliad. You can see her at 3 in the morning if you stand far enough away with a sniper scope and zoom in on her, and it's genuinely just a JPEG image of La Llorona, but it's like that little story, that little tidbit's really interesting to me, and I guess you could also essentially say the witch from Left 4 Dead 2 kind of has like the same essential description. It's a woman in white, weeping, crying, long black hair covering her face. You could essentially tie those two together, I guess, also, if you really were reaching, you know what I mean?
That's actually really cool. I never even thought of it like that.
Yeah, I completely forgot until I started looking into pop culture references, and then I remembered Left 4 Dead 2 and regular Left 4 Dead, but I've never played the original. But in Left 4 Dead 2, she appears as a crying, and when you hear the crying, that's how you know you're getting close to her. And that's what I remembered. I was like, well, you could loosely tie those two things together, essentially.
Yeah, so I've actually had a little what would you call that? A theory. I have a little theory about all three of these women, and it's going to be weird, because I don't know if you believe in any kind of supernatural, because I'm not going to say I don't, but I believe in some supernatural things. I do believe there's aliens, and I do believe in ghosts,
I feel like this podcast wouldn't work if I didn't believe just a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, but I have a feeling that this entity, or these entities, are just one, like, demonic entity. Because you got La Llorona, who only attacks basically just children. She drowns them.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got the other two, well, more so the La Llorona, who attacks men in the forest. And that's trying to be unfaithful, or in the workplace, I guess you could more put it out, because all these guys are workers. And you got the woman in white, because that's the only thing she's really called in the other legends, who is the one that's a hitchhiker who's constantly attacking men. But each one of them talk about devouring souls, other than... Well, doesn't La Llorona actually talk about that with the children to try to get her children's souls back, and since she couldn't, the other way to do it would be to eat them? Or something like that?
Essentially with La Llorona, I guess you could make that connection just due to the fact that when she's drowning children, she's taking their souls. Like, whether the stories want to confirm it that way or not, I mean, she's killing them. She is taking essentially what makes them alive away.
Okay, so yeah, you could argue that she's taking, like, all these souls. So,
technically,
in a way, could these all be combined into one entity? Like, one demonic entity?
Okay, so I believe that theory very heavily just due to the simple fact that it all comes back to the same thing that we talked about in the beginning, how it comes from Latin American lore. For example, the conquistadors brought over the tale of La Llorona, and then Latin Americans took that tale and flipped it into La Llorona, and then Americans essentially took La Llorona and flipped it into the woman in white. So it could all mean the same thing. It all means the same thing. They're all the same entity with different backstories, but they all do the exact same thing. They all take souls.
Yeah.
So I could see how it could be seen as the exact same, like as a demon that manifests into the form of a woman, because in my opinion that would make sense, because not just men, but women and children, when they see a woman crying at a lake bed or at a river or in the woods, or a woman that needs a ride, most genuine people are going to stop and ask questions and be like, hey, are you okay? And that would make sense if it was a demon, because it'd be like, well, haha, I've tricked you. You know?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in most demon stories, that's what it is. It's just, I'm going to trick this person so I can kill them.
Exactly. It's a lot of trickery.
Yeah. I think that's it, though.
Yeah, no, I think we've done a lot. We've got through all of information. All the information that I know of is gone, or said. So, do you have any information that you might have not, like, remembered off the top of your head at the time talking through it, but you could think of now?
I think we got as much information as we could out there. Don't think we fumbled over words too much. We used a lot more fillers than I thought we were going to.
Oh, definitely. No, I think that's all the information I have. So I'd like to thank you guys for watching and tuning in, just listening in general.
Thank you for tuning in to episode 2 of What Goes Bump in the Night. If you guys enjoyed what you heard, go ahead and leave us a like and subscribe if you want more.